When you hear the word berserker, what comes to mind? A snarling Viking, eyes wild, charging into battle with inhuman strength? A warrior so fierce that even seasoned fighters turned pale at his approach? That's the Hollywood image, but the truth is far more disturbing and far more fascinating. The berserker wasn't born that way, he was made. Ordinary men were transformed into nightmarish killing machines through secret rituals, brutal tests, and mind-altering practices that pushed them beyond human limits. These weren't just battle tactics, they were spiritual experiences, psychological conditioning, and physical transformations designed to unleash something primal buried deep within. And the shocking part? It often happened in a single night. This is the untold story of how Viking rituals turned men into berserkers. Overnight, a reality far more terrifying than any fantasy. Part 1. The Calling of the Berserker. Not every Viking could become a berserker. This path wasn't open to every farmhand with an axe, it was a calling or a curse. Berserkers were feared and revered in equal measure. Kings prized them as bodyguards. Armies unleashed them as living weapons. Poets sang of their fury. But ordinary people whispered about them in fear, calling them wolves in human skin. The process began with initiation. To be chosen, a man had to prove he was willing to abandon his humanity. Strength and skill mattered, but above all, it was the willingness to give up comfort, morality, and even sanity that defined a berserker. Candidates were stripped of their possessions, taken deep into forests or mountains, and left to confront nature, hunger, and fear. For days, they fasted, deprived of food and often water. Sleep was denied. Isolation gnawed at their minds. When they returned, if they returned, they were changed. Weak men broke, strong men endured. But only the truly relentless, those who embraced suffering, were deemed worthy of the next stage. Because becoming a berserker wasn't just about strength of body, it was about surrendering the mind to something older, darker, and far more dangerous. Part 2. Entering the Trance. The Mind-Altering Gateway. The most frightening part of the berserker transformation wasn't the muscles, the roars, or the bloodlust. It was the trance. Berserkers didn't fight like normal men. They fought as if possessed, shrugging off wounds, ignoring fear, and moving with the unshakable fury of something otherworldly. To reach this state, the Vikings relied on a series of rituals designed to strip away reason and unleash raw animal rage. The role of substances. Archaeological and historical clues suggest that berserkers may have used mind-altering plants and brews. Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric mushroom, a bright red, white-spotted fungus known for hallucinogenic and stimulant effects. Consumed in controlled amounts, it could trigger visions, euphoria, and bursts of energy, but also rage and disorientation. Henbane, a toxic plant that causes aggression, delirium, and heat surges, possibly mimicking the berserker's famed ability to ignore cold steel or icy weather. Alcoholic mead spiked with herbs, strong honey wine infused with psychoactive plants may have acted as the final push into frenzy. Whether through mushrooms, herbs, or concoctions, the purpose was the same: to destroy ordinary perception and replace it with primal instinct. Chants, drums, and the heartbeat of war. But chemicals alone didn't make a berserker. The rituals also relied on sound. Drums pounded in heavy, repetitive rhythms, mimicking the heartbeat. Warriors howled chants invoking Odin, the All-Father, or animal spirits like wolves and bears. The sounds were relentless, echoing in forests or halls until the warrior lost sense of self and merged into the rhythm. This wasn't simple preparation, it was psychological reprogramming. The drumbeat lulled the rational mind into silence. The chants filled the void with rage. Soon, the line between man and beast blurred. Becoming the animal. The final step of the trance often involved ritual transformation into an animal. Berserkers believed they carried the spirit of a wolf, úlfhéðnar, or a bear, berserker. They donned animal pelts, sometimes even dripping with blood, to symbolize rebirth as a creature of war. Some gnawed raw meat, growled, or crawled on all fours, severing the last ties to their humanity. Others entered battle roaring, foaming at the mouth, or biting their own shields. Terrifying displays that convinced both allies and enemies that they were possessed. Once the trance took hold, the man was no longer himself. He was weapon and beast combined. Part 3. Unleashed on the battlefield. If the rituals were terrifying in private, the results were nightmarish in battle. When the trance took hold, berserkers were unleashed not as soldiers in a formation, but as living storms of destruction. They didn't march in neat lines or wait for orders. They charged headlong, roaring like animals, slamming into the enemy with such ferocity that even seasoned warriors faltered. Strength beyond reason. Accounts describe berserkers performing feats that bordered on impossible, shattering shields with their axes as if they were kindling, breaking enemy lines alone, scattering warriors who had trained for years, ignoring wounds that would cripple or kill another man. Some reports even say they kept fighting with arrows stuck in their bodies. Their berserkergang, the berserker rage, was both physical and psychological. The more terrifying they appeared, the more their enemies lost the will to resist. Fear became their greatest weapon. Frenzy tactics. Unlike disciplined Viking shield walls, berserkers fought as if possessed. They rushed ahead of their comrades, drawing enemy attention and creating chaos. They howled, bit, and clawed like beasts, instilling horror before striking with steel. They often used dual weapons, axe and sword, or two axes, maximizing speed and unpredictability. In some sagas, they were said to gnaw their shields in fits of rage, as if eager to devour the enemy next. To allies, they were both an asset and a danger. Yes, they could break the enemy line, but they were uncontrollable, sometimes attacking friend and foe alike when the frenzy peaked. Invulnerable fury. Medieval chronicles often describe berserkers as impervious to fire or steel. Some say arrows bounced off them. Others claim blades snapped against their skin. More likely, their trance dulled pain so completely that they fought on, oblivious to wounds until the frenzy burned out. In a world where battles were often decided by morale as much as blood, this image of invincible madmen was enough to shatter enemy courage. Facing a berserker wasn't just a fight, it was facing a monster. The fear they inspired. Imagine it. You're a farmer conscripted to defend your land. Across the field, men line up in neat ranks. You steady your spear. Then you hear it roars, animal shrieks, shield biting, and blood-curdling howls. Half-naked men with blood-smeared faces sprint toward you, eyes wild, weapons swinging without hesitation. Would you stand your ground, or would you run? For many, the answer was simple. The berserkers won battles before they even began. Part 4. The Price of the Frenzy. If the battlefield revealed the terror of the berserker's rage, what came after revealed its true cost. Because the berserkergang, the frenzy that made them gods of war, always came with a crash. The collapse. When the trance broke, berserkers didn't stride home as victorious heroes. Instead, they often collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies, drained by the unnatural surge of energy, left them trembling and weak. Some fell into deep sleep for days, unable to rise. Others were left so vulnerable that even children could have killed them in that state. In sagas, there are stories of berserkers being slain after battle, not by enemies, but by opportunists who waited for the frenzy to pass. Their invincibility lasted only as long as the storm. The physical toll. The frenzy didn't just end in weakness. Many berserkers bore long-term damage. Broken teeth and scarred mouths from biting shields or even their own bodies. Torn muscles and cracked bones, ignored during the rage but felt afterward. Scars upon scars collected from wounds they didn't register until too late. Their bodies became maps of their madness, living proof of the price of their power. The psychological cost. But the deeper price wasn't physical, it was mental. Imagine living with a force inside you that could make you unstoppable, but only if you surrendered control completely. Many berserkers were feared even by their own kin, seen as half men, half beasts. Some were plagued with fits of rage even outside of battle, snapping into violence without warning. Others lived with isolation, distrusted and avoided, admired for their power but shunned as dangerous. To be a berserker was to live between two worlds, not quite man, not quite monster. Both revered and feared. In Viking society, berserkers were a paradox. They were champions of kings, bodyguards who could intimidate entire courts. They were symbols of Odin's chosen warriors, proof of divine favor. But they were also outlaws in spirit, seen as uncontrollable forces that might turn against their own. Some sagas describe rulers who outlawed berserkers, fearing the chaos they brought. Others rewarded them with gold, women, and land until they became too dangerous to keep close. The curse of glory. For many, the berserkergang was a blessing, a path to glory, fame, and fear. But behind the songs and stories, it was also a curse, a power that consumed its wielders, leaving them broken, hated, or alone. To fight like a god, a man first had to sacrifice his humanity. Part 5. What fueled the berserkers' madness? The sagas describe the berserker frenzy in vivid detail, men howling like wolves, immune to steel, foaming at the mouth. But they don't tell us how it actually happened. For centuries, scholars and storytellers have argued, what turned ordinary men into these unstoppable monsters? The truth may be a mix of psychology, ritual, and substances, a recipe lost to time, but still debated today. Theory 1. The power of belief and ritual. The Vikings lived in a world where gods and spirits weren't just myths, they were present forces. A berserker didn't just think he was possessed by Odin's spirit of war, he knew it. Through rituals of chanting, drumming, and sacrifice, warriors could work themselves into a trance state. Rhythmic drumming and howling altered breathing and heart rate. Staring into fire or the eyes of their kin built a hypnotic rhythm. Ritual oaths bound them to the frenzy. Once the vow was made, their mind would unleash the fury. Psychologists today compare it to mass hysteria or trance states seen in other warrior cultures, like the Zulu impi or the samurai's death meditation. In short, the frenzy may have been pure mind over body, amplified by ritual. Theory 2. The mushroom hypothesis. One of the most popular theories is that berserkers ate hallucinogenic mushrooms, specifically Amanita muscaria, the red-capped fly agaric you see in fairy tales. These mushrooms can cause hallucinations and distorted senses, increased aggression, numbness or reduced pain sensitivity, uncontrollable muscle spasms. That sounds a lot like the berserker trance. But there's a problem. Amanita muscaria can also cause nausea, vomiting, and dizziness. Hardly the recipe for fearless warriors. Some historians argue that if mushrooms were used, they may have been prepared carefully or combined with other herbs to minimize side effects. Theory 3. Alcohol and herbal brews. Others believe berserkers drank fermented brews laced with powerful herbs before battle. Henbane, Hyoscyamus niger, a toxic plant, is a strong candidate. It causes delirium, hallucinations, and aggression. Alcohol mixed with herbs could have dulled pain while supercharging aggression. Archaeologists have even found traces of henbane seeds at Viking sites, suggesting it was known and possibly used. Theory 4. Pure adrenaline. Perhaps no herbs or mushrooms were needed at all. Warriors who trained to unleash their fight-or-flight response could trigger floods of adrenaline and endorphins. Adrenaline makes the body stronger, faster, and less sensitive to pain. Endorphins numb wounds and boost stamina. In life-or-death combat, this chemical cocktail could create a natural berserker frenzy. Modern soldiers in extreme situations report similar states: tunnel vision, numbness, and unstoppable aggression. The likely answer: a mix of all. The most convincing explanation? Berserkers likely used a combination of factors. Rituals and belief gave them a mental trigger, herbs or brews amplified the frenzy. Adrenaline from the battlefield carried them the rest of the way. This layered approach explains why some berserkers seem truly superhuman, while others lost control, collapsed, or even died. The real secret? Discipline. Whatever fueled them, the most terrifying part was not just the rage, it was the control. A berserker wasn't just a madman foaming at the mouth, he was a trained warrior who could direct that frenzy at his enemies. That's the difference between a beast and a weapon. And that's why kings kept berserkers at their side, until the danger outweighed the reward. Part 6. Heroes or monsters? How society viewed the berserkers. The berserkers were unlike any other warriors in the Viking world. To the average farmer, fisherman, or even fellow fighter, they were both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Imagine living in a small Norse village. You've heard tales of berserkers who ran into fire without burning, took arrows without slowing, bit through shields as though they were bread. But you've also heard rumors of berserkers who couldn't control themselves, who killed their own kin in frenzy, or destroyed entire feasts with their wild rage. So where did these men stand in Viking society? The glorified elite. At the highest levels of society, berserkers were considered sacred warriors of Odin. Kings and jarls often kept them as bodyguards, shock troops, or enforcers. When a rival threatened their rule, unleashing a pack of berserkers was like sending wolves into a flock of sheep. Some sagas describe them as invincible champions who stood beside kings in battle. To have berserkers in your retinue was a symbol of prestige and power. They weren't just muscle, they were propaganda. If your enemies knew you had men who could ignore pain and fight like rabid beasts, half the battle was already won. The feared outcasts. But there was another side. When berserkers weren't at war, they were often seen as dangerous liabilities. At feasts, they might suddenly fly into a rage and attack guests. Some sagas tell of berserkers demanding fights at weddings or celebrations, killing innocents in the process. Families feared their uncontrollable wrath, especially when alcohol flowed. In fact, Icelandic law eventually outlawed berserkers entirely. By the 11th century, to go berserk was punishable by exile or death. The message was clear: what was once seen as divine became too dangerous for a peaceful society. Holy warriors of Odin. Still, in their prime, berserkers were deeply tied to Norse religion. They were often considered Odin's chosen fighters, embodying the god's chaotic, destructive side. Odin himself was a master of frenzy and madness, the god of both wisdom and war. Berserkers, in their trance-like rage, were thought to channel his essence. Some scholars believe that before battle, berserkers may have participated in ritual sacrifices, blood rites, or animalistic transformations, literally imitating wolves and bears to invoke Odin's blessing. This gave them a spiritual authority that ordinary warriors could never claim. A double-edged reputation. To the common people, berserkers were living contradictions. Protectors and destroyers. Sacred champions and cursed madmen. The pride of kings and the terror of peasants. This duality made them both celebrated in sagas and feared in daily life. They were not just men. They were forces of nature, revered like storms or wildfires. The fall of the berserkers. As Christianity spread through Scandinavia, berserkers became increasingly marginalized. The church saw their rituals as pagan madness, demonic possession, or outright witchcraft. What was once divine frenzy became a sin, and slowly the tradition died out. By the end of the Viking Age, berserkers had become legendary figures rather than living warriors. Their image survived in saga literature, but the men themselves had vanished, outlawed, feared, or assimilated into new warrior traditions. Part 7. The aftermath of the berserker rage, broken bodies, and haunted minds. For all their terrifying power, berserkers paid a steep price for their fury. What happened after the frenzy is just as shocking as the rage itself. The crash after the storm. When the berserker rage burned out, the warriors were left in a state of total exhaustion. Their muscles gave out, leaving them weak and trembling. They often fell into a deep, almost death-like sleep that could last hours or even days. Some sagas describe them as so drained they were as weak as children. This sudden collapse was one of their greatest vulnerabilities. If they weren't protected by comrades, they could be killed with ease once the fury left them. Imagine a man who could slaughter dozens one moment, only to collapse helplessly into the dirt the next. The physical toll. Going berserk wasn't just about strength, it was about pushing the body beyond its natural limits. The frenzy likely caused adrenaline spikes that overheated the body, leaving warriors drenched in sweat, elevated heart rates that could trigger seizures or even strokes, muscle tears and injuries ignored during the fight only to leave them crippled later. Archaeologists have found Viking remains with signs of repeated trauma, shattered bones, chronic joint damage, and healed skull fractures, evidence of men who lived violent lives and survived only to be broken by them. The mental toll. The sagas hint at another price, the toll on the mind. Some berserkers were haunted by visions long after battle. Others lived in a constant state of agitation, unable to separate frenzy from normal life. The rage may have rewired their brains, leaving them prone to depression, hallucinations, or uncontrollable anger. Modern psychologists might call this post-traumatic stress disorder, mixed with the lingering effects of drug use, trauma, or ritual conditioning. To their peers, though, they weren't patients, they were monsters who had lost the balance of mind and body. Feared even in peace. This made berserkers dangerous outside of war. Imagine one of these men sitting at a feast. The wrong word, the wrong look, a spilled drink, and suddenly he was smashing tables, biting shields, and cutting down his own kin. This is why sagas often depict them as troublemakers who disrupted peace as much as they protected it. Over time, their inability to control the rage led to their outlawing in Iceland and beyond. legends of the broken berserkers. Some stories tell of berserkers who never came back from their trance. Men who went mad, wandering the forests like wild animals. Warriors who could not stop fighting even when no enemy remained. Others who grew so weak after the frenzy that they withered away, their bodies destroyed by years of pushing beyond human limits. To Vikings, this wasn't just tragedy, it was a curse from Odin himself. A gift of power that always came with a price. A glimpse into the human cost. In the end, berserkers weren't just mythical beasts of war. They were men who gave their humanity to the gods of battle and paid with their bodies, their minds, and sometimes their souls. Their stories remind us of a universal truth: power always comes at a cost. Part 8. The Forbidden Rituals Secrets Lost to Time. If there's one mystery about the berserkers that continues to baffle historians today, it's the rituals that created them. These weren't simple warrior drills, they were secret rites, guarded carefully, whispered only among chosen circles, and they remain shrouded in both myth and fear. Animal sacrifice and the spirit of the beast. The sagas suggest that berserkers didn't just pretend to be animals, they believed they were becoming one. Before battle, some rituals called for animal sacrifices: wolves, bears, or even dogs. The warriors smeared themselves in the animal's blood, wore its skins, and howled as though summoning its spirit. This wasn't symbolic. To the Viking mind, the essence of the beast entered the man, granting it savagery and resilience. Imagine standing in the flickering firelight surrounded by warriors howling in unison, their bodies painted with blood, their eyes wild with trance. It wasn't just a ritual, it was possession. Mind-altering brews. Another theory points to psychoactive substances. Mushrooms such as Amanita muscaria, the infamous red and white fly agaric, may have been consumed before battle. Combined with fasting, chanting, and sleep deprivation, these substances could push the mind into a hallucinatory frenzy. Heart pounding, vision blurring, fear evaporating, the body moving as if possessed. This might explain the superhuman feats described in sagas, as well as the uncontrollable rages that followed. The power of sound and rhythm. Ritual wasn't just physical, it was auditory. Warriors chanted in deep guttural rhythms. Drums thundered. Horns blared like the roar of wild beasts. This rhythmic assault on the senses induced altered states of consciousness. The Vikings didn't have neuroscience, but they understood instinctively that sound could transform the mind. Modern parallels exist in military chants, shamanic drumming, or even the intense energy of heavy music. For berserkers, it wasn't entertainment, it was a tool of war. The fire circle. Some sagas hint at warriors gathering around great bonfires the night before battle. Here, they perform tests of endurance, leaping through flames, holding burning brands without flinching, dancing until collapse. The fire wasn't just heat and light, it was purification, burning away fear, hesitation, and weakness. To step into battle after such a ritual was to believe you were already dead and reborn in fire. Secrecy and fear. What makes these rituals so elusive today is that they were never written down in detail. Why? Because even among Vikings, they were dangerous knowledge. Too much power for common men. Too terrifying to be passed freely. Too close to the gods or the demons to risk angering them by careless retelling. Instead, they lived on in sagas as half-whispered legends, in Christian chronicles as condemnations of pagan madness, and in archaeology as fragments, skins, bones, broken horns, fire-scorched earth. The mystery that endures. And so we are left with fragments, a puzzle of blood, fire, trance, and beastly fury. Did the berserkers truly believe Odin himself rode their bodies into war? Did they lose themselves entirely to drugs and frenzy? Or was it both a perfect storm of ritual, belief, and biology? What we do know is this: something transformed them from ordinary men into the nightmare of battlefields across Europe. Something powerful enough to baffle even us 1,000 years later. The legacy of the berserker. The berserkers disappeared 1,000 years ago, yet their shadow has never left us. Outlawed and erased. By the late Viking Age, berserkers had become as dangerous in peace as they were in war. Their uncontrollable fury threatened villages, feasts, and even kings themselves. In Iceland, laws were passed to outlaw the berserker frenzy. A man who went berserk in public could be declared an outlaw, stripped of protection, hunted, or killed without consequence. Christianity's spread across Scandinavia only deepened the disdain. Priests condemned berserkers as demon-possessed pagans, tools of the devil rather than Odin. Slowly, the rituals faded, their secrets buried. But their reputation, that never died. Legends that wouldn't stay dead. Even centuries later, sagas still spoke of them, men who howled like wolves and fought like demons. Warriors who could not be cut down by steel. Figures both terrifying and tragic, admired and cursed. Their legends seeped into folklore across Europe. To the Christian chroniclers, they were cautionary tales. To poets and skalds, they were figures of awe. To enemies, they were the embodiment of fear. And to us today, they remain symbols of primal rage, unstoppable fury, and the blurred line between man and beast. The human truth beneath the myth. What makes the berserkers so haunting is that they were not gods, nor monsters, nor spirits. They were men. Men who subjected themselves to pain, fear, and rituals that broke the boundaries of human endurance. Men who gave up their humanity for power only to find themselves cursed by the very gift they sought. Their rituals show us something both timeless and uncomfortable, the human desire to become more than human, no matter the cost. Echoes in the modern world. Today, we no longer howl at the moon or bite our shields before battle, but echoes of the berserker remain, in soldiers who push themselves beyond exhaustion, in athletes who speak of being in the zone, consumed by adrenaline, in cultures worldwide that use music, rhythm, and ritual to transcend normal limits. The berserker may be gone, but the psychology of transformation, of tapping into something deeper, darker, and more powerful than ourselves still lingers. The final image. So imagine it one last time. A firelit clearing. Men chanting, painted in blood, their voices shaking the trees. The skins of wolves draped across their shoulders. The red glow of mushrooms and madness burning in their eyes. Tomorrow, they will charge into battle like nightmares given flesh. But tonight, they stand on the edge of humanity, already half gone, already more beast than man. That was the berserker. Not a legend, not a fantasy, but a terrifying truth of the Viking Age.